Welcome to Law Firms on the Map.
Go-to digital marketing show for attorneys serious about their business growth. I'm your host, Kristaps Brencans, the CEO of On the Map Marketing. Our agency has helped thousands of attorneys crush their SEO and digital marketing goals over the last decade. Today, I'm meeting with Mike Mann. For those who haven't heard of him, Mike is a legend in domain world acquisition market and currently operates phone.com, domainmarket.com, and in his domain portfolio holds domains like SEO.com. Mike, I'm so excited to have you on. You're a very well-known name in domain and digital marketing world, so it's a true honor to have you on our podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. You know, we got introduced through our recent hire, Chris Waters. He used to work with you at SEO.com. So obviously it was a big honor bringing him on, and he talked a lot about you as a mentor figure as well, and always was very impressed with the business ventures you've done. So maybe you can give a little history on yourself and, you know, how did you get in domain world? What's been your business path? Kind of give us a quick overview of your business profile.
I'm old, so I have a long history, but I'll try to abbreviate it as much as possible. I mean, really, originally, I'm a charity worker. And at some point, I realized, you know, I couldn't finance my charity life and my charity work unless I did business. So I had a little bit of skills studying business, and I decided to go in the library. This is like the internet had barely been invented back then. So I actually sat in the library for months and months and months reading business stuff and trying to decide what sort of business to start. I had already started some non-technology businesses. I ran a delivery service that I started right out of college and some other tiny businesses, but I wanted to get into something that was going to produce better money. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was studying best and smartest authors and periodicals kept talking about this thing called the commercial internet that was going to develop. There was already the internet for universities and for scientists and the military, but it hadn't been commercialized. In fact, the idea of commercializing the internet was severely frowned upon. The people didn't want the cluttered traffic and people to profit on the internet, which is kind of silly when you look at it now.
Right.
But in any event, you know, the biggest predictions and the best predictions was this internet thing was going to be huge. So even though I had almost no technology skills, I decided I was going into the internet business. And I hired some people that worked for the US government as internet experts to help me on the side start a tiny company called Internet Interstate. And so eventually there was this mergers and acquisitions in the internet space, and my company got rolled up into this thing called Verio, which some people have heard of. It became a very big deal at the time. And so then I was back on my own again, but I still happened to own a couple dozen of these domain names that I had registered on behalf of potential customers. I was registering them, hoping to attract customers to be my customers. And by the time we sold the company, we offered web development on top of, you know, dial-up internet access, T1 internet access, sort of the old school basics of internet service providing.
So if I can kind of add a couple milestones. So you're exploring new business opportunities, and internet commercialization was the one at that time. What is the time frame we're talking about? Was that early?
It was 97, even before that, like 94 is when I was researching it. I had sold my first company by like 97, I think. So 94.
And what did your first company do? What was
Internet Interstate? It connected mostly law firms because we were in Washington, D.C. We were teaching law firms what is the internet, what is email, how do you dial in with your modem, and then eventually Mark Andreessen invented the graphical user interface for the web, Mosaic. And so instead of these text-based, you know, lists and things that people could click on, there became this graphical thing called the World Wide Web.
I see.
So like, it's actually interesting because fast forward very many years, my daughter is about to is an attorney, and she's going to get a job with DLA. So DLA Piper. And that was actually one of the first websites we ever did, was DLAlaw.com in Washington, D.C. And, 30 years later, my daughter has a job with them as an attorney, just totally coincidentally. But in any event, that was what we did, is we connected lawyers and anybody to the internet. But lawyers were one of our hot topics since we were in Washington, D.C. And
right, and they were trying to get educated on technology.
Yeah, and actually, even though I'm not a lawyer, my daughter's a lawyer now, my dad's a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, my great-grandfather was a lawyer, my business partners are lawyers, some of my best friends are lawyers, my cousins are lawyers, so I'm kind of enmeshed in the legal world in a lot of respects.
It just makes perfect sense having you on our podcast. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, that was a great intro on your history, how you got into the domain. So during that time frame, you realized that if you wanted to be in the internet and entrepreneurship, so towards the 90s, like early 2000s, that's when you constantly were acquiring domain names because they were just available, and you started building your portfolio?
Basically, so the impetus was, after I had sold that internet company, I owned some domains, and all of a sudden I started getting offers on one domain I owned called menus.com. And one day somebody offered me $25,000. I was like, you got to be kidding me. That's awesome. So I verbally agreed to sell it to him. Literally the next day, somebody else offered me $50,000 because I said, I'm sorry, I already sold that domain. I can't sell it to you. He's like, I'll give you $50,000. I'm like, so unfortunately, I was a man of my word, and I sold it to the first guy for 25, but I could have got 50 for it.
Right.
And again, these things cost me $35 a year to pay for the renewal. So I'm like, you're kidding me. Somebody's going to pay me 25 grand, 50 grand for this thing. So at that point, the light bulb went off. I'm like, this is insanely profitable. So I hired some of my same software programmers. Again, the people who helped me start my first company, worked for the U.S. government as Unix hackers, who were like super skilled technology people. I still work with some guys like this. But in any event, I had them write me software, which was eventually patented, called NameFind. So what it would do is I would look at the most popular domains in the world, and I would look at how they were structured. Then I would have the software develop tens of thousands of combinations with those same types of structures, and then automatically check the registration to see if they were registered or not. So you could put in law, for example, and it would look up Law Central, Law Online, e-law, and it would look at every possible modern, permutation of the word law, legal, whatever, and it would check to see if those domains are available. So then I would have the software register all the very best ones. And that's how I started building my collection. Plus I got a patent for the idea that I developed.
And so how much of that portfolio was also law firm domains? Were you buying some of those too?
A pretty good amount. I mean, again, lawyers can profit tremendously from a good domain. And since I had a lot of exposure to the legal community, I went pretty heavy on law firm domains at the time.
That's interesting. And in the midst of it, you also got exposed to SEO. You mentioned your company was also offering web development. So tell us a little bit why and how you got into that side of digital marketing, SEO. And kudos on acquiring SEO.com. So I'm curious what was the history behind that?
Sure. Well, basically, I wanted to fully integrate. I had all the best domains at some point. I kept building and building, using my software, creating new software to buy additional and sell additional domains. And I wanted to kind of vertically integrate and get into all sorts of things that would optimize my own company, because I needed a lot of SEO services. I needed to hire a lot of SEO people for my own company. And I figured if I'm hiring all these people, helping develop them and train them, I could have my own company surrounding it. So at the time I was building and buying lots of tiny companies. I eventually, between my companies and charities and projects, I had like 20 things going at the same time, literally, as I built it up. But SEO was one of the preeminent things that I wanted to build. So really, I just bought a tiny company that was cheap, but it had like 3 or 4 super high-end experts. in Salt Lake City. The company was called Web Targeted. And then it just so happened to be a good friend of mine, Mike Belazanakis, who's still a friend of mine, owned the domain SEO.com. So I gave him 10% of the company in exchange for the domain. So he owned 10% of the corporation, SEO.com, and the object was to build it up and sell it, which was becoming my specialty at the time. It's starting companies from scratch, building them up and selling them. And so eventually, instead, we still haven't sold SEO.com. I still own it. So, but I eventually bought out his shares. So, I bought his shares in the company. He had already traded us the domain name. So he got cashed out. And that's how so I took SEO.com and applied it to the tiny company, changed the name Web Targeted to the name SEO.com. And at some point we had about 120 employees, virtually all based in Salt Lake City.
Wow, that's quite impressive. And currently, the company still operates, as I understand.
It does still operate, although I don't work there. I outsourced it to a friend of mine instead of running it on a day-to-day basis. And I'm focusing on. I own a company called Phone.com, which is a super cool, dynamic corporation that law firms can benefit from the services. They're very low cost and very valuable. And my main company called DomainMarket.com. And I still have a lot of charity work I do. And I wrote a book that I promote a little bit called MakeMillions.com.
It would be interesting to double click on what you call your specialty, which I think you're still heavily involved in. And I think this is where we have really good intersect of your proficiencies and what our listeners are looking for, building a brand. I think all business operators are extremely excited about the idea. That's their brand. That's their, baby in a sense. That's their business.
Yeah.
So tell us how you have approached building a brand by, obviously investing in domains. What are other aspects of it? What is the naming? And what is Mike Mann's playbook of building a brand?
Yeah. Well, again, I offer mostly online services, but even if somebody doesn't offer online services, they need to do marketing and promotion online. So any way you slice it, you need the very best .com domain or domains for whatever business you happen to be in and happen to be promoting. And the best domains provide very extreme value, whereas once you go lower down the quality scale, they don't offer a tremendous amount of value because they're not as easy to remember and they're not contextual and they don't have value. So the flip side is the best domains have two very distinct, valuable characteristics. One is that the domain itself keeps going up in value. In my marketplace, they almost double every year. They keep going up and up and up. The average sales price, used to be about $1,000 several years back. Now the average sale price is like $5,000 to $10,000, and that's because mostly the lower end names sell. There's a lot actually of the more valuable names at the top, but people can't afford them or don't understand how to appraise them, so they invest in the lower end. But in any case, the main thing is if you just bought the domains, you could buy legal domains if you're a lawyer, or you could buy any domains if you're an investor or lawyer, as long as they're the best ones. And the best ones keep going up in value. But if you're a lawyer and you buy the very best lawyer domain names, they'll also attract new leads, prospects to your website. People will remember your name. It'll have a higher conversion value. Microsoft did a study called Domain Bias in Web Search. So basically, they proved scientifically, mathematically, that if you have a better domain name, you'll have a much higher conversion rate and a higher retention and stickiness for your clients. They'll refer you out more frequently. And as a result, you'll make higher profits. So again, the two things are that the domain itself is a great investment. It's going to keep going up in value. And all during that period, you can get more clients at a higher conversion rate and higher profit. And, it's like a feather in your cap because you're out there with a super cool domain name, like in my case, phone.com, SEO.com. People are never going to forget those, and they're incredibly valuable, and they keep going up in value. At the same time, I get more clients, a higher conversion rate, higher retention, more referrals as a result. So that's the same thing anybody can leverage by working at the top of the food chain in domain names.
Most important aspect is how fast can you remember this domain? So phone.com is easy to remember. SEO.com, very easy to remember. For attorneys, that would be some very specific keyword phrasing for their law firm. You gave me a couple of names that are currently available in your domain market, of which I'll just name a few. One I thought was interesting is militarydefenselawyers.com. So that's your specialty and niche. I mean, you can't find a better domain. I would also think military defense, that's a nationwide type of practice area. So it doesn't have to be locally specialized.
Yeah, it's an explicit niche. So again, if somebody actually, one of the 100 firms that offers those services would be extraordinarily well served to get that domain and have their website language surround that content, that context.
Yeah. And so it's interesting how you're talking about this topic, because I'm seeing a lot of, venture companies that are like internet brands, Red Ventures and other ones. They're doing exact same playbook. They get a very memorable domain name and they build out that entire niche, which becomes super powerful because you have this really strong brand, high quality design obviously has to come with that, and useful information that's serving your audience. Now, Mike, I want to ask you, how is a domain name valued? And maybe, for example, we can talk about military defense lawyers, just so we have an actual domain name. And let's figure out, how is that valued, and what do you think that value could be in a couple of years after either sitting just there or actually developing it as a brand?
Yeah. Again, we own a separate company called accurateappraisals.com where we appraise domains. I'll talk about some of the analytics we use in order to figure out the value of a domain. But we have a unique methodology where we have 3 global experts on domains, including myself, do an independent appraisal, and then we give the customer the average of the 3 and put it on a certificate. So it's not biased by any one appraiser. So that's really unique in the world. Nobody else has an appraisal service like that. And actually, one of my appraisers is Braden Pollock. He's actually the world expert on lawyer domain names.
Oh, really?
He's actually married to Lisa Bloom, who I've met as a famous attorney. I don't know if you've heard of her before, but her mom is this lady, Gloria Allred, who's like a super famous attorney, and Lisa Bloom, they're super famous Hollywood related attorneys. But they do an incredible job. But anyway, Braden's married to her and he helps run her firm. And he's just coincidentally a world expert on domain names. He's a domain trader like myself, and a good friend of mine. So I'd recommend you interview him next time.
That would be great. Yeah.
He's actually one of the appraisers on our company, Accurate Appraisal. So back to the main point here is we use a whole bunch of characteristics, and then we sort of create algorithms by balancing out the characteristics and looking at what value to each characteristic and creating a balance. So it's reasonably complex, a little bit of art and a little bit of science. And a lot of it, you just do a personal test after you're done with all the analytics. You just look at the name and think about the domain. But just for example, some of the characteristics are the Google ad rate, like how much do people bid on those keywords in Google, for example?
Interesting. Okay.
And also the Google search results. How many search results come up when you put that expression in quotations? If you don't put it in quotation mark, it's not an exact match, so the numbers are too fuzzy. But if you put it in quotation marks, it'll tell you a more exact number of the Google search parameters.
Okay. Let's try to appraise military defense lawyers.
Let's try to appraise it.
Yeah.
Well, I need to use my software to do it. I mean, I can just, it's probably worth $100,000 off the top of my head. But the other thing you do is this thing called an alternative domain. So you would look in all the other domains. Again, the software does it for me, but you would look at all the alternative domains in the world. Like, is there a .co.uk, like one in England? Is there a .ca in Canada? Is there .mx in Mexico? So you would, we look at like 100 different ones and we see, well, if there's 10 matches, that implies the domain has a certain type of value. If there's 0 matches, it has much less value. If there's 20 matches, it would have a very high value. Again, there's alternative domains being used with different extensions, but it has the same second level domain. It's called the top level domain is the .com, the .org, the .whatever. And the second level domain is the string, in this case, military defense lawyers. So again, we'd look at the alternatives there. We'd look at Google. We'd look at some of our competitors have different tools that ranks domain names. So we'd look at the rankings that the competitors have for those names and their software has. There's this thing called the Internet Zone file. So we'd compare it to that where, like, is there a military defense lawyer.com? Is there a militaridefense.com? Is there alternatives in the com space is one way. And then the alternatives with different TLDs, as I mentioned before, the .co.uk, .de for Germany, .whatever. So there's all sorts of ways of slicing it and dicing it and looking at it and then merging all that data together into an algorithm and then giving it
it's a pretty complex process. Now, for someone who wants to build their brand and, let's say they own a law firm and they want to invest in the premium domain name, how can they make sure that they're not overspending? There's a lot of domain markets, and you see these numbers. Even when you said, military defense lawyers could be around 100,000, that seems like a pretty pricey ticket. So how do you make sure that you're not overpaying for it, and you're giving it the right value it deserves?
Yeah. Well, again, for a lawyer, I mean, lawyers are notoriously cheap and bad at business, basically. But if they were not so cheap and they were better at business, they would realize that if they just get first of all, the domain's going to go up in value. So it's a good investment no matter what. Second of all, if they just get 2 or 3 clients, it's going to pay for the domain.
Right.
So if they get 100 clients, they're going to be deeply in the money. And again, 100 clients over 10 years, whatever. They're going to be very seriously into the money. Again, 100 extra clients that they would not have otherwise gotten without that domain, without that branding, without that Google recognition. 100 more clients is going to be worth millions of dollars to them probably. And again, the domain itself is going up in value. So even if they got 0 more clients, they could sell the domain 10 years from now. They could sell the domain back for double or triple or quadruple, whatever it happens to be. So the lawyers are making a mistake. I mean, they should buy all the best domains. Again, if you go lower down the quality scale, it's not going to have that same effect I mentioned. It's not going to go up in value, and it's not going to bring in any customers, and it's not going to provide a ton of branding value. But if you go in the middle of the value branding chain or to the top, those things are incredibly good investments. The other reason they're incredibly good investments is there's very little competition there. People don't know how to appraise a domain. They don't spend a lot of money in domains. A lot of people just don't have any money. So even if they know it's a good deal, they can't afford it anyway. Whereas the lower domains are very heavily traded, very competitive. People buy them all up. So they're not as good as a value. They're fair market valued. But the higher end ones are below fair market value because they could bring you so many clients and because they go up in value so quickly. And there's very little competition in that space. So, like somebody just bought chat.com for something like 20 million bucks last week. So again, somebody who can afford it, but there's no competition there. It's going to be worth 25 million next year. So the guy's in the money and he's going to start a business surrounding it. So
I'm hearing 3 main elements. One, exact match domain, which will drive organic traffic just because the keywords are in the domain. So you're going to get more customers. 2, it's a long-term investment because the domain will continue going up in value. As long as the internet is there, your domain will continue holding a value and it will increase in value. And 3rd, just the brand stickiness. And to your point, and the Microsoft study was that people will convert a lot more because they can recognize your brand faster than if you have some obscure general name domain.
Yep.
Okay, great. Those are some really, really valuable insights.
And again, people are going to click on it more, which Google's going to recognize and keep bringing it higher to the search rankings. And then, there's the organic SEO, obviously, as you know, and then there's the paid pay-per-click traffic, which, again, it looks really good if you have a paid ad that says SEO.com, phone.com. It's going to get a higher click-through, higher conversion rate, and again, more brand affinity for your clients and your prospects.
Nice. So I want to, add another element to the brand building aspect. Law firms are notorious for investing in phone numbers. I know you have exposure and knowledge on the phones as well. What is the interplay between premium domain name and premium phone number? Is it the stickiness, recognition of it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you take a lot of phone calls, and before the internet, people obviously use the phone on a higher proportion of their marketing and their leads. So, but if you still use the phone a lot for your sales and your marketing, you can benefit from controlling the both spaces. And again, you want to have the brands to be correlated. So, if you had 1-800-lawyers, and you also had 1-800-lawyers.com, and you also had lawyers.com, just for a random example, then you would control that whole space, and it would be integrated in the minds of the clients, and they could call you or type you in depending on, what their interest is or what your marketing is. There's some other things to keep in mind about the .com domain names. If you look at the advertisements on TV, I had a prediction a really long time ago that .com domain names would show up on all the TV commercials. And sure enough, 20 years later, almost every single TV commercial has a .com domain. You could buy a .law domain, .legal domain, whatever. They're called GTLDs, but nobody's going to remember it, and people are going to be confused what it's all about. So you want to stick to .com. And again, the other point I like to make to people, because people keep pretending .com is going to become obsolete and people are going to use all these other extensions. There's 2,000 other extensions, so there's a good reason to believe, .com would lose some of its cachet, but it's actually not the case. The world's best marketers and advertisers are the people who work at the Fortune 500 companies and the advertising agencies that work for Fortune 500 companies. Every single one of them uses a .com domain name. Yeah. 500 out of 500 use a .com domain name. So, again, time has proven that the .com will hold its weight and the other things don't make a lot of sense. So even though there is .law, .legal, whatever, those aren't cool and those aren't relevant, and people are just going to be confused by them because they've never heard of them. And also a lot of email programs and web programs think they're spam because the spammers like to use those for some reason. Right. So they get removed, deleted, discounted. They get discounted in Google in many cases because of the spam effect of them. So again, .com is the preeminent, legitimate brand. The other ones work the same theoretically, technologically, but they just don't hold any value and they're not good for branding.
I want to throw a little hypothetical for you. Your whole family are attorneys. Now your daughter just became an attorney. Let's say she decides to open up a law firm and you're going to be her brand and marketing consultant. How do you apply Mike Mann's branding playbook to her newly started law firm? Thinking from branding, domain name, like what would be the steps you would go through? And I'm using this exercise as also recommendation for lawyers listening to this and law firm marketers on how to think about specifically law firm marketing and how you would approach it with premium domains in mind.
Yeah. Well, just to point out the reference material, my site domainmarket.com talks a lot about, the value of premium domains, how to value them, how to do branding. It has links to the referencing articles, to the Microsoft study. And also my main website, mikemann.com, I did like 30 or 40 live streams or something like that. And each one of them I interviewed lots of really smart internet leaders, including a lot of domain and marketing SEO experts. But at the end of each one, I did a course on domain branding and valuation. So you can watch all those live streams. There's no advertisements on there, and it's just, they're very informational. And if you don't want to hear, the guests, you can skip to the end where I'm talking about domain names on each one of them. So those are all linked at my main site, mikemann.com. It's also links to my other companies, SEO.com, phone.com. My book, makemillions.com, talks a lot about marketing, branding, and domain names. You can download my book for free from the site. There's no advertising in there either. So, but as far as my daughter, I would give her the same advice, is to buy all the very best lawyer domain names, set up unique websites for each one, and then feed them back into the same forms and the same email addresses, because you can't put the same content on each one. For one thing, they all have specific topics, but as you get penalized for having redundant content. So you need to have unique content on each of the websites. But my daughter could buy the best or get for free from me, but if she wasn't my daughter, she could buy the best, 20 best law firm domain names that are available at domainmarket.com, build a unique website for each, bring in leads. If they would all go up in value. If she didn't specialize in that type of practice, she could sell the leads to her friends and other people at her law firm or whatever. And then again, you would build a big client base in that way, and each of the domains would go up in value as you were doing so. So they would be incredibly good investments for her.
Yeah. I love the scale you think at, 20 domains, but let's say the 20 domains is not, within the investment reach. Maybe just one, and we're going to hyper focus on that one domain. Any branding advice? Should they also look into a phone number? How do you think about design? How do you think about what this brand experience needs to have?
Yeah. Well, again, if you look at my website, I can just give a couple quick examples. And the issue is, you look at the best domains. I explain why that's a good idea, and I've done it in my own career. And you just, which one resonates with you the most? You can negotiate the prices. You get the best domain you can get at the best price, and you build upon it for years and years and years. And it just becomes extremely valuable. It's hard, again, if you're working at the top of the food chain, it's hard to see a scenario where you're going to lose any money like this. But again, I have itlawyer.com. So if you're an information technology lawyer, like DLA is, that would be an incredibly good investment. Legalprotection.com is a generic expression, which means a lot to a lot of people. It's extremely valuable. Modernlaw.com, if you like the ring of sounding modern, you're not an old-fashioned attorney. Again, you couldn't beat modernlaw.com. Americanlawyers.com has a patriotic ring to it. And again, if you don't do work outside of the United States, that'd be a perfect contextual domain for you. Businesslegal.com. Again, 60% of the lawyers probably specialize in business law. So again, businesslegal.com is extremely valuable. Lawpractice.com is very generic. Again, juvenilelaw.com, there's probably 5% of the lawyers in the world, or maybe 3%, whatever it is, specialize in juvenile law. There's nothing that could be more targeted than juvenilelaw.com. It would be an incredibly good investment. It would pay itself off if you got 5 or 10 clients from it. And again, keeping in mind, it's going up in value anyway, because it's a very high level contextual.com domain name. So it's going up in value. You would get a bunch of clients and a bunch of profits if you bought that domain. Venturelawyer.com if you're a Silicon Valley type lawyer. Financelawyers.com if you're a Wall Street type lawyer. Municipallaw.com, productlawyer.com. So again, there's just a ton of good contextual domains that people failed to purchase and failed to invest in that are still out there available for lawyers.
So I guess it's part of the research and the practice area you're focused on. And then we need to go back to the 3 things you already emphasized. Domain will go up in value. Look for exact match phrasing, so you pick up some of the SEO benefits. And third, just brandability is going to help with the stickiness of the domain, and people will convert better. Well, Mike, we're running low on the time here. As I know we could go on and keep talking more about domains, and I'd love to get into more, what you're doing with your businesses and what are your plans with those, especially the SEO.com, which we talked a little bit about. But I guess last kind of note, something you want to recommend to our listeners, as from your experience and exposure in technology since the early 90s.
Again, it's just investing in your brand and taking it seriously, and don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Like, focus on what's going to be the best for you and your business. It's building, long-term competitive brands, pushing your competitors out of the marketplace or taking a greater market share of whatever your niches happen to be. And, they're just great investments, basically. And then go and do charity work with some of your profits.
There you go. Mike, where can our listeners find us? You already mentioned a couple of things, but maybe there's any particular of your material you want to promote.
If they want to email me, Mike Mann at mikemann.com. My main website is mikemann.com that has links to all my live streams, to my charity work, to my book, all my companies. There's hundreds of articles written about me that you can find in Google. A lot of it's linked on my website. There's a lot of YouTube videos, and it's just a lot of stuff out there. It's mostly doing what I'm doing here is talking about branding and domain names. I don't usually talk so much about myself as I do about the actual material. But
yeah, well, great. There's a lot of information about domaining and general branding and things of that sort. So thank you so much, Mike, for coming on. It was a great conversation, and our listeners will think twice about investing their brand and maybe looking into some of the premium domain names. I think in a mix with SEO, that's inevitably good investment. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate it.